Hello, everyone. Julie Ross here with Shea Kemp, and we are doing chapter 2 of our book club on volume 6. So, I think it's really important to kind of look at this chapter because obviously this was a major, important part of her whole philosophy of education. When I first read it, I was kind of like, well, yeah, like children are born persons, like they're not animals or
Right.
aliens or something. Like, of course, they're
Mhm.
people. But in Charlotte Mason's time, that was a huge just point to make because children in Victorian times were, better off kind of to themselves. What is that? Seen and not heard.
Yeah.
They were raised by nurses,
Mhm.
by governesses,
Yeah.
um, you know, expected to, just kind of be off until they were adults, and then they were acceptable to be a part of the family,
Right.
which is so just countercultural and kind of the opposite, even of how we approach children to the other extreme sometimes today,
Mhm.
making them the whole center of our universe. So I don't know. What did you think when you first heard that? Was that weird for you, Shay?
Yeah, it definitely was the first time I heard that because I thought, well, it seems obvious, but
Yeah.
when you started to understand her point and how important it is that we grasp what that means, not just that they are born persons, we can agree on that, but what does it mean to your theory and practice of education that they are born persons?
Right.
Then once you start to grasp that, I think it really is kind of overarching for the choices that you make and the things that you include in your homeschool and the things that you decide maybe don't fit. Once you
Mhm.
start to get that concept, so it seems easy to understand at first, that, well, it's obvious, but deeper than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was definitely an elevated view of children, especially like I was saying during her time. She starts off and she says, with like the infant, right? We're always like, oh my gosh, they're so cute, and um, but she says the problem is before us, and hitherto educators have been inclined to answer it in the negative. Their notion is that by means of a pull here, a push there, a compression elsewhere, a person is at last turned out according to the pattern the educator has in mind. So it's this concept of, our, a blank slate or a lump of clay
Yeah.
or, a bucket to be filled and, whatever metaphor you want to use. That, our job as educators is to shape and mold how we want them to be, right? Rather than viewing them as persons from the beginning, as a spirit, which she goes on to kind of talk about the difference between a mind and our spirit,
Right.
um, and that they're complete in themselves, and that we're not to mold and shape them how
Yes.
we want them to be. They're already complete in themselves, and we're growing that out
It's
of.
so respectful of the
Yeah.
child rather than imposing yourself on the child when there's no way that we're never going to create little stamped examples of ourselves. So I just love that she says, these people, we need to have respect. They're worthy of respect. These little people that are running around in our houses, our homeschools.
Yeah, and she gives some reasons why we should respect them and some examples of how amazing children are from the beginning. She quotes this poet, and I won't read the whole poem here, but he's basically just saying how beautiful the trees are and how beautiful all the people look to him. And when you think about poets, right, they're just in awe of all the beauty of all the world, and just explain that so well. And she says, that's that delight of the world and that ability to see the world in different eyes. That's what children have, but we kind of train that
Yeah.
out of them. Like
Hmm.
um, she also says that, and she gives examples of children she knows, like who are 3, who already know 3 different languages, and as examples of how capable a child's mind is of learning things that we don't think they're capable of learning. Were there any other examples that you saw in there of how she's saying how miraculous children are.
I just loved the point that she makes about all that the infant actually does accomplish in his first 2 years. And when I
Mhm.
read that, I thought, wow, I mean, you know that because you look at a newborn and then how far they come in 2 years.
Yeah.
But if you break down all those skills
Oh my gosh.
from no language to language and no understanding, and being able to ask for things or have wants like or preferences that
Mhm.
go from there. It really is amazing. We take it for granted, I think, in our own children. Maybe
Mhm.
for me, probably the first one, like, you're awed by everything. But then I have
Right.
5 kids. And so, then I think, well, the time you get to the first one, fifth one, it was
Yeah,
like,
you're like,
okay,
woo.
we've
Yeah.
done this before, and you sort of lose that. It's easy to, forget
Mhm.
how far they actually do come in those 2 years, which she's explaining that as proof that their minds are capable. That this,
Mhm.
I'm showing, I want you to step back and think about what your child actually was capable of by 2 years old, so you can realize what they are capable of moving forward. That mind was already there.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, that was a great example. It cracked me up. She talked about a Martian coming to
I know.
dinner. Like, I never noticed that before. I was like, just thinking of Charlotte Mason, like imagining aliens. Like,
What I
no,
mean, there were no Martian movies back then, so I
I
wonder
know.
what was she thinking about? What was her mindset? Yeah.
And just how much they would have to learn, so much just to understand how we move and how we take up space and,
Mhm.
all
How we
about,
communicate, how we
yeah,
ask for what we want,
yeah.
those things. Mhm.
Yeah, that just made me laugh. And I love where she says his mind is the instrument of his education.
Oh,
His
yes, I love that
education does
part.
not produce his mind. I'm gonna read that again because it's so good. Mic drop, Charlotte Mason. His mind is the instrument of his education. His education does not produce his mind. So the mind is what is growing and creating the education that he's having. It's not our work to make the mind happen. It's already there.
Yes.
Or if they get this or they don't get that, then their mind's not going to grow. Like it's there. Its natural thing is to grow, right? We are nurturing it and giving it affections by what we're introducing it to.
Hmm.
And she talks about that a little bit later, but we're not making the mind.
And I love the proof she gives which cracked me up, is about the ceaseless why. His why is ceaseless, she says. And that's proof. I mean, we've all been there, like, please, that stage, it comes, why are you asking so many
Yeah.
questions?
Because
Why?
I said so. That's why. You
Yes,
have to get to
because
the
I
point.
said so, right. That's great. That's a great parenting strategy. I've used it plenty of times. Oh my goodness. But
Some days you just can't answer all the questions.
no, you just can't write those questions down. I've literally said, won't you write those down or record them on my phone and we'll discuss them later, because I cannot, my brain can't handle all those whys right now.
Yeah.
But the why, all those whys that are thrown around there are proof that the mind is already there. We don't need all these little things to spark it, or
Mm,
these
mhm.
things to make it interested. It is already interested.
Yeah, our minds are
Otherwise,
naturally curious. We just train the
yes.
curiosity out of them.
Right. The one she says later on something about that. I can't remember the exact word that she uses, but basically, let's see, she says it's fraudulent practices is what we
Mhm.
do later on in this chapter.
Okay.
And basically, she names pretty much everything I learned at teacher college.
Wait. I think I wrote next to that. Oh, this is everything I learned in college.
I
Like,
wrote the same thing.
okay, I wish our page numbers matched to be able to find things. It's
I
at the end.
know. I'm not sure what.
Is it at the very end?
What'd you say?
Is it at the very end?
Yeah, I think it is the very end. I wrote down the same thing because I'm like, everything that they put here, that you have to entertain them, and we've got to come up with all these activities.
Mhm.
Let's see if we can find it.
Well, the one that I'm thinking of, and it might not be the same one, is at the very end, and it says, "In our training college, the students, so these are the people that she's
Yes,
the
yes,
teachers,
are not
are
taught.
not taught that
Yes, this is it.
this is
Mhm.
what they're not taught. They're not taught how to stimulate attention, how to keep order, how to give marks, how to punish, or even how to reward, how to manage a large class or a small school with children in different classes. All these come by nature in a school where the teachers know something of the capacities and requirements of children. And
Yes.
I went through that lesson with, oh yeah, that was everything I was taught how to
That's
do
what
in
I wrote.
teachers college.
This I wrote, this is what I was taught. That's what I wrote in
Like I
mine.
had a whole class on classroom management.
We did too.
Yeah.
And then you had to do this senior seminar where you had to do a management plan and all
Oh
this
yes,
stuff.
yes. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was
Wow.
like most of the focus wasn't really on like how kids actually learn. It was
No.
how do you manage their behavior?
Yes. How to stimulate them. And
Yes.
I think we get a lot of questions. And I know we're sort of skipping ahead in the paragraph, but
Yeah, yeah. We'll go
I
back
do
to it.
think these things tie together that um, we have a lot of questions about how do I stimulate attention in my children if they don't like this book or if they don't like
You're
this
not
subject.
interested.
We get a lot of questions about that. And it's hard to give a short answer to that because the
Yeah.
fact is it all goes back to these principles. And this particular one is that you don't have to stimulate attention. You just have to let the mind grab what the mind needs. And sometimes it's not what you think it needs out of that paragraph or that chapter or that book, right? Or that lesson. So
Yeah.
it's a
And
hard
sometimes
concept to leave.
go ahead. What were you saying?
It's a hard concept to get rid of in your mind that I have to stimulate attention.
Yes. Oh yeah, though that's still hard for me. Like, yeah, they have to love and just be so excited about everything.
Yes.
Really? Like, are you in love and excited with everything that you're doing? No.
Mhm.
I
Right.
mean, that's also part of life too, right? But it's training the affections, and that takes time. Um, so yeah, it's not going to always be exciting or interesting, but like Charlotte Mason saying, it's that feeling of awe, right? She talks, and after she says all the things that her teachers don't learn, she says, um, you know, they're hearing of children reciting Shakespeare or
Mm.
discussing, narrating Shakespeare, or looking at a beautiful work of art and narrating it in detail. Um, you know, this, we take off our shoes from off our feet. We did not know it was in them, whether it be their parents, their teachers, or more onlookers. And with some feeling of awe upon us, we shall be better prepared to consider how and upon what a child should be educated. Um, and so I think it's, again, it's not these gimmicks to get their attention. It's not an easy answer, like you were saying, right? It's continuing to do these things um, that leads them to become more interested in them, if that makes sense.
And sometimes what we're looking for as evidence of stimulation or evidence of attention or evidence of a relation with the text, we're looking for this particular evidence of that. And that's not always the actual evidence of it because we've discussed so many times before those ideas, when they are actually ideas that we're presenting, they have to sit, they have to be turned around in the brain. Maybe your child needs a few more experiences, just life experiences, before they go back and they understand something they read. So it's not always, like we're looking for an evidence of them paying attention or being stimulated by this is that they say, wow, read some more. And sometimes, or they're like, we're looking for this evidence. And that's not always true evidence of these things that we really want to go inside them. So it is a surprise and a revelation when your children do these things. And I think I gave this example one time we talked before. My daughter decided this year she wanted to do her copy work on Shakespeare's sonnets.
That's awesome.
That's what she wanted to do. I'm like, what? Because last year you said, why are we learning Shakespeare?
I love that, Shay. That is awesome. That is awesome because it's such a great example of training those affections, right?
Yes.
You were forcing it upon her, right? You were showing her how beautiful it is. it doesn't matter if you like it today. This is the
Right.
beautiful thing this is the beautiful feast I'm gonna put up before you, right?
Mhm.
You can take and reject what you want. I'm not
Yes.
forcing. It's not
Yes.
like, oh my gosh, well, if you don't like this, then you're
You get an
grounded.
F. Right. Or yeah.
Like,
Right. Right.
yeah, it's just okay. Well, you might not take much from this today, but we're gonna keep doing it.
Right. And they would hate it actually because I always print out the poem, and always when I would pull out Shakespeare, it would be a groan and well, I don't understand this, why. And so then when she said, could I just do all my copywork and choose my own sonnets this year and do all, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know where this came from. And I can't give you an explanation. Like, I think a lot of what parents want to do is they want, okay, you got this from your child. How did you get that? Give
Yeah.
me the formula.
Where's the formula? Yes. That doesn't happen because they're persons. And your
Yes.
child's a different person than my child.
Right.
Crazy idea.
Yes. And so when it comes back to that person needing that, whatever it is they need, trusting this process and
Mhm.
this principle that they are people. And
Yeah.
that's why I really hope that everybody will spend time reading these things and getting this, because,
Yeah.
sometimes it's really hard to give like a quick answer on Facebook or a quick email answer. When there's just not really a formula to give because your child is their own person. So,
Yeah, and I love that too because I do get like in cycle one, I do include Shakespeare, and people are like, "Why? Why do I have to?" My kids hate listening to it, or we're trying to figure out the meaning and we can't figure it out. I'm like, "That's
right.
not the point. You're not supposed to be figuring out
Yes.
the meaning here. This is not a high school English, or I would say
Right.
college English course, right?
Mhm.
This is just listening to the beautiful cadence of the language." Or we've had people complain about copy work with like poetry, right? And the punctuation's all over the place. Spelling in Shakespeare is very different than what we're
Yes,
doing
it
now.
is.
And it's this might not follow your formula of how to teach your child punctuation.
Right.
And you might be worried they're never going to learn punctuation because they're copying Shakespeare, but they're going to learn way more in the process of beautiful language and vocabulary and rhythm and cadence and just
Yes.
beauty, right?
Yeah. The exposure and the noticing,
Yes.
we can devalue those two things so much. We can put more emphasis on output.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
for
well, if
sure.
they can't
Yeah.
write a sentence with that kind of punctuation, then they didn't learn it. But there's so much value, and Charlotte talks about this over all of her volumes and writings and articles. She may not use these exact words for the concept, but the exposure and the noticing, that
Mhm.
you're just notice that in
Yeah.
this
Oh,
poem,
that's weird.
this
Yeah.
yeah, right, this poet chose to capitalize all the beginnings of, just notice, we're just noticing this,
Yeah.
I'm exposing you to this. And it may seem like there's not a lot of value in that, but there really is a lot of value and a lot of importance, and there's a lot of brain power connections going
Mhm.
on there, and
Oh,
analysis, that these higher level thinking skills that are going on as your child is exposed to that and notices those things.
yeah, if all they ever read is prose with a capital letter at the beginning and a period or some other punctuation mark at the end and the semicolon put in the right place every time and
Right.
no weird hyphenated line drops like they have in poems sometimes,
Right.
like they don't notice a difference. They don't see the beauty. They don't see the difference. Like a
Right.
nature study, they're supposed to be noticing kind of, oh, well, that tree looked like that. Now it looks like
Yes.
you have to notice those things among all different subjects. And
Yes.
copywork and grammar is one of them, but we're getting off on the rabbit trail about that.
We are.
My
But
soapbox
it's
about
an
that.
important one.
But it's a great example of thank you so much for sharing that because it is such a great example of building their affections. And something similar, and I can't remember what the movie was that we were watching. I'd like to say it was something in Harry Potter because every Christmas, well, every December, we start watching Harry Potter 1 and we watch all 8 of them.
Oh, that's
Um,
fun.
yeah, it's a good way to like when it's dark and
Yeah.
so we just finished the last one last night. We just watched 30, 45 minutes.
As you go, right.
Yeah. But anyway, there was some scene in there, and my daughter said something. She's like, "Oh, that's reminds me of Alice in Wonderland," which we read about 8, 9 years ago.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And people are like, "My kid didn't learn anything from that book because that book's just weird." Yes, it's weird. That is
It is.
the point
Yeah.
of the book. Is that Lewis Carroll was saying that children are being force fed these moralistic Victorian tales. And so I'm just going to write a whimsical children's book about how children's brains actually work.
Yes.
And, but it was like, when she said that, I was like, that
No.
was so long ago, right?
Yeah.
That connection, there was no plan to point that out while we were reading it 8 years ago and da 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 da, right?
Right.
The idea got in there somehow, and then the connection, it comes out way, 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 way later. And so, I've had people say, well, it's been our first term, and somebody who's been talking to my child, and I felt like self-conscious because they were asking what they learned and they didn't know what to say.
Right. Yes.
And it's because they didn't learn a bunch of facts, like, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Well, maybe if they would have learned something like that, they could say that on the spot, right? But how can a 6-year-old articulate the ideas that have been going in there? And because they're connecting these ideas to their personhood and their minds that are growing, and at that age, they don't have that much to connect it to.
Right.
But it doesn't mean, and I really think, my daughter was 6 when we read Alice in Wonderland.
Wow.
Because that idea got in there somehow, right? And 10 years later, it comes out.
There's a depth when you offer them things with depth. Then what comes out later on, it may not be that input like X plus Y equals whatever. Then there's a depth to what you do get, and it's that patience and that big question mark, like like you're saying, okay, well, list the first 15 presidents. Okay, well,
I don't think I could do that.
Right. Well, I can't. No, I can't do it. I can maybe say three, but
yeah, right. But can you tell me a story? Can you tell me something fun? They probably could, right?
Yes. And when you look for that depth and you're getting that kind of those, you see it. You will see it, but it requires this trusting the process. And like she's saying,
about that in this chapter, right? She talks about, education, like faith, is the evidence of things not seen.
That is exactly the quote I was looking
for.
I
Want to make that a pillow and just give it to everybody. Little cross-stitch. Education, like faith, is evidence of things not seen. Do we see it? Eventually, yes.
Yes. But it doesn't, but seeing it does not mean that your child maybe is going to beg to read that book every day in literature. I mean, so I think that's the thing is maybe changing what we look for, changing our ideas of what we are looking for, what we're expecting from them. But that is the very quote. That is so. Yes, and she says before that, I want to read that quote just before that because I think it's really important. It says, that which was born of the Spirit, the idea came first and demanded to confirm and illustrate. How can these things be? Quote, we ask, and the answer is not evident. We're looking for this evidence. And sometimes that evidence, if we don't see it, we can get really discouraged. And, we get parents who give up on Charlotte Mason method and give up on AGF, give up on beautiful literature, or even maybe a particular book. And they're looking for evidence. And listen, I've been there. So that I don't say that in a judgmental way. I've been there. I'm like, oh my goodness. Now let me remind myself. Why are we doing this?
Why am I doing this to myself? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And, she goes on to say, the mind is not the way that we grow a mind. It's not just through play, but play is very important. It's not just through our environment, but our environment is very important. It's not through just movement, but movement is very important. But the mind must come in contact with other minds through the medium of ideas.
So powerful.
This mind to mind, which is explosive, right? And our business is to give children the great ideas of life, of religion, history, science. But as the ideas we must give, clothed upon the facts as they occur, and must leave the child to deal with these as he chooses. And that's that. Which
is exactly what we're saying, was that your child is a person, so they get to choose. And that's where the self-education comes in, is that, I can read the same books. And now that this is my fifth one, and I'm reading the same books to her that I've read to the other four. It's really interesting to
It's
see the
really cool to
things
see
that
that. Yeah.
she
Yeah.
takes
Yeah.
away or doesn't take away.
Mm.
That's what can drive you crazy. I'm like, you mean you don't like this book? The other kids love this book. You're not taking this away, but this is what she chooses because she is her own person. So,
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she's talking about these ideas clothed with facts, and I think
mm-hmm.
like we're talking about this evidence. Like facts are really, you can see the evidence that, oh,
Yes.
you memorize this fact, right? But there's no meaning or depth behind that if you don't understand the ideas that are associated with that. And the way that you get those ideas is through the beautiful literature and the living books. And she gives a very long example of a geography lesson
Yes.
in here, several pages long, and that, you know, um, you want them to kind of be in this large room to see the world through travels and, you
mm-hmm.
know, not just maps and lines and things on a page that have no absolute meaning, right? They might be able to recite the continents. They might be able to tell you all the state capitals, right? But do they have any idea what it would be like to go to Asia?
Yes. Or what is it like in the states that border us? I can name them,
Right.
but what do those people, what does their experience, what is their experience like? What ideas might they have that might be different because they have mountains and we don't? Or it's a plain there and we don't. What are the ideas behind that? And those are the things that do come back. She talks about in the next page, she says, when she's talking about this geography lesson, all this, she says his error is rather want of confidence in children.
Mm.
And it's really easy for us when we don't get those facts spouted back at us that we feel like is maybe evidence of a education going well, that we
Mhm.
start to lack confidence in our own children. And so
Ooh, that's a good
when
point.
we have that confidence in our children, okay, I trust their minds. I trust that
Mhm.
they're created with curiosity, wonder, going to provide a feast. I have confidence in them, in their mind. And I have to remind myself of that, a lot. I mean, I have to remind myself of that it's their education. I have confidence in what they're getting. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's not till, like you're saying, how many years since you read Alice in Wonderland?
And
And that mind was in there working, but we don't understand how those connections are made. And that's why we trust in a power beyond us
mhm. Yeah.
as we homeschool. So
Yeah, that's huge here. Um, so in terms of how, is there any other reflections or things you wanted to bring up before we kind of get into the practical here?
let's see. I think mainly the in this section is just that she's brave enough to ask herself, this is the bottom of page 40 in mine, but do our geography lessons take the children there? Do
Mm,
they experience of it? I think it takes a lot of courage and bravery to ask ourselves those questions. And that's why I need the time of exam week between terms or Christmas
yeah.
break. I need that time to step back and really evaluate for myself. Because it's really easy for me with my teacher mindset to slide back into those. We'll just throw in a little activity here. We'll just throw in
Yeah.
this. We're just throwing that. We're just makes me feel good.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but I do think that it takes a lot of bravery and courage to ask ourselves those questions, about our
Mhm.
lessons. So
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, she also talks, before we move on to the third section, about the importance of a child's imagination. And I think this is
yes.
huge. And I think um, we can often train our children how to not be imaginative, right? Especially if we are so didactic and we're so focused on facts and just rote learning and worksheets. That will train the imagination out of anyone.
Yes, that's right. And she calls those fraudulent practices. She
Mhm.
says technical, commercial, even historical geography, any sort of geography. And in fact, made to illustrate our theories, we are guilty of fraudulent practices.
Yes. Yeah. Um,
And It's
Yeah, and
easy
I
for
think
somebody to.
parents are sometimes fearful of children's imaginations, like,
Mhm.
let's shy away from fairy why does Shirley Mason include fairy tales? She actually talks about building the habit of imagination,
Yes.
Um, and she says that our children should be full, you know, have a gallery in their mind of all these beautiful pictures. I love
I
that.
love this passage.
I know,
Yes, I
great.
love this passage. Yes, I love it.
Do you wanna read that part?
Sure, it says, how do we prepare a child again to use the aesthetic sense with which he appears to come provided? His education should furnish him with whole galleries of mental pictures, pictures by great artists, old and new. And then she lists a whole lot of them there. And she says later, in fact, every child should leave school with at least a couple of hundred pictures by great masters hanging permanently in the halls of his imagination, to say nothing of great buildings, sculpture, beauty of form and color, and things he sees. Perhaps we might secure at least 100 lovely landscapes too, sunsets, cloudscapes, starlit nights. At
Mm,
any rate, he should go forth well furnished, because imagination has the property of magical expansion. The more it holds, the more it will hold. I love
that
that.
is the greatest quote. Yes.
So beautiful and so powerful.
Yeah, and I think about, kids in school might leave with 1 or 2 beautiful pictures, and here she's talking about hundreds of pictures of beautiful
Mhm.
things in their
Yes.
minds. But I also love that, yeah, the more imagination you have, the more it grows and the more you can imagine more things
Yes.
and more possibilities, and I just love that.
And books like Alice in Wonderland, I just want to say this is an encouragement. Our other books, there's been several different ones that seem, I think it's absurdity. This seems absurd. This doesn't,
This
those sorts of, they open your child up to these possibilities of
Mhm,
absurdity. And the people that are
mhm.
willing to stretch their minds and imagination, even they're even some of the most technical geniuses that we have, because
Oh,
you
yeah.
can use your imagination in a technical way. It doesn't always have to be in a creative writing
Oh,
way or
true.
a
Mhm.
painting way. And so I just want to, sometimes we think, okay, well, these fairy tales or these stories of imagination, they're only for my creative kid. But we need, I want my children to be open to the possibilities of um absurd, crazy idea. What if this might work?
Oh,
Whether
yeah.
it's technical or their own possibilities in their own life, or maybe it is something creative. And unless we put those things in front of them, that's just not going to happen by accident.
No, 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 not at all. We can become very practical and utilitarian in the way that we view the world, right? If we're
Yes.
not continually fostering our imagination. And I also think of books like the Narnia series, right?
Yes.
Highly imaginative. And then C.S. Lewis based a lot of his work off of George MacDonald, who was a pastor in England before him, and at the Back of the North Wind and The Princess and the Goblin,
Yes.
highly imaginative, right? And I believe it was George MacDonald who talks about the importance of the intersection between faith and imagination.
Hmm.
And if you don't have an imagination, how can you have faith in something that you can't see and really understand? You have to have an imagination to even start to comprehend that. And I interviewed Sarah Clarkson. We talked a lot about this whole concept, so I'll link to that podcast as well. I love her and what she has to
Yeah,
say
she's
on this whole topic.
brilliant. Yes.
But in my own life too, I find that when I become very, I don't want to say depressed, like just down and so focused on the details of my life
Stuck.
and
Stuck.
stuck
Yes.
and stressed. And, I'm
Yes.
sure that doesn't happen to anybody else this time of year. It's just me.
Hand raised me.
It's because I've neglected to feed my mind and soul with beautiful things as well.
Yes.
And my imagination is
Mhm.
going, and I'm so
Yes.
focused on, did I get my task done? Oh, I forgot to mail this to so and so, and oh, I forgot to buy a Christmas gift for grandma, and I lose sight of the whole purpose, really, of all of
Yes.
this, right? And so I have to feed my mind and take the time to, okay, I'm gonna stop what I'm doing. I'm gonna read a book. I'm gonna
Mhm.
listen to a song. I'm gonna go out in nature, and feed my own imagination as well, because we
Yes. And
never
that seems
stop
to be the
growing.
first thing that always goes, right? I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
those things, it's easy for me to make time for all the things that have to be done, the work things, but then
Mhm.
I cut those other things out so quickly. I'm picking up a book I need to read instead of one I want to read that really fosters my imagination or, yeah, it's a good thing to remember.
Yes. And I love how she ends this section and she says, it is not only a child's intellect, but his heart that comes to us thoroughly furnished. Can any of us love like a little child?
Oh,
And my kids were laughing because we just finished reading The Best Christmas Pageant Ever a couple days ago.
that is a funny book.
It's such a funny book, but I always cry.
Yes.
The end of it, when Imogen starts crying, I'm gonna cry right now just thinking about it. And my kids, like my two teens, took out their phones because they're like, "Mom, you cry every time you read a Christmas book." And there's some that I don't cry on, like Gingerbread Pirates, but most of the really ones I love, I cry.
Yes.
And like, why do you always cry in these books? And I think it just it goes back to the simplistic that, like, I always cry when little children get up at church and sing.
I
Every
know.
It's just something so beautiful about
Because their
the
hearts
faith.
are so open.
Yes. Oh, so open.
Yes.
Oh, I lost Shay. Well, I'm gonna keep going here. It's so open to the way that they love people, and we can learn so much from them if we observe children and how they treat people, how they pray for people, the questions that they ask, and the faith that they have. I think there's a reason why, Jesus says we should have faith like a child. We need to observe just the way that they treat other people and view people, and the spirit that they have. All right, in this last section, she talks about our motives for learning. And she goes in here and she does talk about kind of the view of children from kind of the lower classes, especially in England at this time. It was viewed that if you were upper class, you were smarter. Or, oh, I think she's back.
I have no idea what happened. It just left. I just been sitting here and it just goes back up.
You're just sitting here talking to yourself?
Yes, I was like, oh, I'm not on there. I don't know. I just sat here and it decided to bring me back. I don't know.
Well, okay.
I
went on to section 3, the motives for learning.
Okay, got you.
And I was saying how in this section she talks about how children of like lower class, and how in Victorian times it was viewed that if you were upper class, you were somehow born smarter or had some more like advantage of your personhood. If you were born into poverty, that was kind of like you were less intelligent or you deserved that, or the mindset behind that was really, really unfortunate. But she's saying, through her schools and the work that they did, and she says in here, tens of thousands of children going through her programs, that, even she goes backwards children are no exception to being able to do these wonderful narrations and retellings and having joy and excitement for learning these big ideas and these concepts. And it's interesting because I get asked about that a lot. Like, is there any proof that this actually works? I get asked this question all the time. Do you have any statistical data on the number of college graduates from people who have used the Charlotte Mason homeschooling? I'm like, no, but tens of thousands of children went through her program in her lifetime, and then more tens of thousands since the 1920s. So it's been about another 100 years.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when I'm talking to people about this a lot. If they know I'm still homeschooling, it's like, okay, well, you don't know. But then as soon as they find out you graduated some, have you ever found that?
Oh gosh, I was just at a party the other weekend, and I love talking to people that don't understand homeschooling or never heard of it.
Yes.
And they're like, "Oh, so you have 2 in college and they're doing okay? Oh, I guess you're fine then."
Yeah. I know. I'm like, I have 3 productive members of society who 2 are graduated from college. 1 is still in college. They all pay their own bills. They live on their own. They can put together coherent sentences. It's really interesting. I think that we are such a society of producers. Like, we want to see what this has got to produce something. And if it doesn't produce something I can see, then I don't know that it is valuable. Right. And that's why we are hesitant, like with the imagination. We're hesitant with these beautiful books. We're doing things like she talks about in her training college. We had quoted this before. We can see if we're keeping order. Marks,
Mm.
like she talks about, we can keep up with that. Rewards, we can keep up with that. Management, we can keep up with that. But if we go back to what she's talking about, the evidence of things not seen, the faith, that's just, you don't know when you're producing, you don't know when that's going to come up.
Right.
It could be years from now.
Yeah, you're right. Um, and she talks in here about the war has changed kind of the view that, okay, well, maybe all children have infinite possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I thought that was very interesting, and culturally that did happen in England after World War One, that, the upper class, they had to start selling a
Yeah.
lot of their land. They were losing a lot of their wealth.
Leveled out.
And yes, and things were being leveled out. Okay, maybe children who have spent their whole life in poverty, maybe they are actually capable of learning as well. And it seems so foreign to us, but I think that still happens a lot, sadly, today, that these children are incapable of doing these things. And you know, I've read stories of people teaching Shakespeare to children, like in New York City, right?
Yes.
And they form these acting companies, and children that couldn't learn anything and were failing in classes suddenly all of a sudden are learning great things. Or, people teaching children orchestra instruments in
Mm-hmm.
African villages, and, just amazing stories. And I think it's the beauty and the power of Charlotte Mason's method. Now, obviously, they're not doing Charlotte Mason, right? But it's the principle
It's
of
the same
taking
principle.
what's
Yeah.
beautiful and good, and that children are born persons, and when they're fed these ideas of truth, beauty, and goodness, things will grow inside of them.
And confidence in their minds,
Right.
regardless of even if your child has some sort of learning disability, even if your child has a learning challenge, or you do, or whatever, there's still a mind in there that has incredible capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have confidence in that and you're focusing on that confidence, it builds confidence in that child,
Mm-hmm.
and it fosters that imagination with these beautiful ideas. Yeah, I mean, I've said before, my friend who now she follows Charlotte Mason's method, but for a long time she didn't, because of some of the things we've already talked about. She's like, I need a grade book. I need a test.
Yeah.
And she has said, if we could just get this principle out for people to understand these things that actually work. I mean, we could just transform so many children that don't have confidence in themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
they, by having confidence in their mind, and then they grow
Mm-hmm.
confidence in their own mind. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I do want to say this. We had a question a couple of days ago about, my child keeps saying this book is too difficult for me. And I think this goes back to that. Now, there are books that are too difficult for a child. You have to figure that out. But a
We,
lot of the time, if you'll say to your child, you know what, I really have confidence in your mind that you
mm-hmm.
can process this book, and maybe it's going to take you a little longer, or
Yeah.
maybe I might have to read, a couple
Yeah.
things, or sometimes I'll let my daughter take a phone, and if she can't say a word, she'll say, what does, and spell it, say.
Mm-hmm.
If she can't figure it out herself, if I can't be right there with her. And it really does grow confidence in themselves when we have confidence in what we believe they're capable of.
Mm-hmm.
So Charlotte's brilliant.
Oh yes. Oh yes, for sure. Um, talking about like children with like the learning difficulties, and I've done podcasts on this before with several people on different topics, but
Mhm.
I think of my one child with dyslexia, and just being so concerned about her ability to write. Will she ever be able to write
Yes.
for school, kind of,
Hmm.
or not, formal
Yes.
writing
Hmm.
someday? And she's in middle school now, and she's at this program where she's been required to write some papers to turn in for somebody else and not for me. And I'm like, ooh. I was really nervous at first, and she dictated it to me, and I just typed it out, and it was like 2 pages typed. Um, and it again, I had to help her kind of organize some of her thoughts after she wrote it. But the language that she used and the imagery, and like it
Hmm.
made me cry. Like
Yes.
it was so heartfelt and just beautiful.
Yes.
And it just struck me like
Mhm.
I've been so freaked out and worried about this.
Yes.
And all of these things that I've been reading to you, have gotten in there, because now I see them coming out in the way
Yes.
that you express yourself and the ideas that you brought into your story in a creative way. Like this, it was like this princess, and the way that she found God. And I mean, it was so full of like all this imagination in the woods, and there was,
Right.
the witch,
Imagery.
of course, and yeah, and Narnia. I was very Narnia like, but you know, it wasn't formulaic. It didn't sound like she had been taught, like, okay, you start off with a topic sentence, and then you have two
Yes.
supporting sentences, and then a clincher where you repeat the 4 word. You know, there was no formula to it. It was just beautifully written, and that's what Charlotte Mason is talking about here with these children who are in the slums. You know, reciting Shakespeare.
Right.
No
And
one
they've been,
never thought they would have been capable of that.
but we
It
put
shows you that children are born persons with these minds. They just need someone to feed them the right
the
things.
beauty, right. Right. We put beauty in front of them and the beauty will come out. I mean, it will come out. And sometimes when you're, if you've ever been like me crying in the laundry room saying, what was I thinking? Why did we do
Mine's the bathroom, but either room is fine.
I go in the laundry room. I'm like, it's so beautiful when you have those moments, when you have those, it's just a beautiful thing. So
Yeah, right.
it will happen.
And you don't know what things you're putting into your children that they're going to capture upon. You know,
Yes.
you might think, okay, well, they don't really like this subject, or they don't like these things, so I shouldn't include this, or maybe we should focus on this
Right.
because they're really super interested in that. And that's fine, like in your free time and stuff. But I'm so grateful now that I have college children that I expose them to this wide feast. Are there things that, now my children's interested in um, neuroscience, right? And she's like, well, I wish I would have taken, like a second level chemistry course when I was in high school. And I'm like, yeah, that would have been nice. But I believe that I've given you the tools,
Yes.
self education, that you know how to teach yourself anything. And so if you want to take organic chemistry, I have full confidence that you will be successful in that. But in high school, she was like, yeah, I don't really like science that much. I don't know if I'll ever do anything with that. But I'm like, well, no, we're going to we keep having this feast of it, but
Right.
we never got to what she was needing for this one class. And then, my other daughter, is now in graphic design in the art school. So she take all these art courses this past semester, and just fell in love with it and loves it, and it was like, never saw that one coming. But it was like, no, we had these picture studies in these art class. It was
Right.
the exposure of things, because I think I'm going in this one direction, but life, and as they take classes and they grow, they're going to probably change, right? And you don't know what feast that you're exposing them to will eventually become something they might choose to study.
No, you have no idea. I have a child who's in aircraft maintenance technician school.
I know,
I
so
can
good.
promise you there was nothing that we ever did on any day beside maybe make paper airplanes. I mean, that would have ever.
No, that is not true, Shay. That's not true, because like you were saying, all those things gave him an imagination and an
Yes.
ability to notice things, and you have to notice things to be able to do mechanical skills.
Right. And it is amazing because the thing when he decided that, for me, even like the idea he had enough confidence in himself
Mm-hmm.
that he would say, sure, I can learn to work on airplanes.
Yeah.
Sure, I can go to this and take, and work on airplanes, no problem. And I'll tell you, he took a test. This is my child that is very, very auditory, very auditory. And I read a lot to him because he had such trouble, reading on his own. He had trouble comprehending. He took a test on Friday with 1,000 oral questions.
Wow.
And he missed 6.
They gave it to him orally?
Yeah, you have to take it orally. You have
Why
to take
is that?
because you have to explain things on this engine or explain. It's all
He had to narrate, Jay?
Yes,
What? That's not a real life skill. We shouldn't be doing that. We should give our kids tests and have them fill out worksheets, because that's what you do in the real world.
Right. So he took this test.
He's tongue in cheek here, people.
Yeah, I know. Are you listening? Yeah. So, I mean, it was amazing, and
Awesome.
I didn't have a plan for that. Is my thing is that you can't look at your 6th grader and say, I'm going to train you up to be an aircraft maintenance technician, you know.
That's all we're going to study because you like to build with Legos. So you're going to grow up to be an
Right.
engineer. So
Right.
we're just going to do STEM and we're going to throw out all this other stuff.
Yes. And so the beauty and all that stuff is in there, you know.
Yeah.
So he had the confidence to even think that he could do this thing, because I thought, oh wow, this sounds like a really hard program, you know, but he's killing it. So
That's
I
awesome.
say that for encouragement, because you know that there are just as many moms out there listening to us now or later when we post this that have the same moments that we had and still have, thinking, you know, is this actually working? But if we're brave enough to ask ourselves those questions, like she says in this chapter, I love that part. Does my geography take them there? Do the things that I'm putting in front of my children, are they living books? Are they full of ideas? Is it just facts and information that they maybe can spout out and there's nothing for them to hang that confidence on later on? Or is there imagination and beauty and it's all generated in there? And when we have the courage to ask ourselves those questions and say, okay, I'm just going to have the faith and I'm going to follow this, it really does give such a beautiful result in the end. You know, and I'm still seeing that. I'm still learning. I mean, I'm still getting results in my own education, learning
Well, I
more.
mean, that's a great point because, you know, adults are persons too. So
Yes.
we
Yes.
should still be feeding our own minds and growing our minds. Don't suddenly not need to be fed on ideas when we reach a certain
Right.
age.
Yeah. I need it
If we
desperately.
want them to be continue to grow. And I just, I think what we're trying to encourage you all in is we have seen in our adult children, you know, the power of them being their own person
Yes.
and the importance of, from a young age, respecting that and continuing to offer a wide and generous feast and
Mhm.
allowing the results to grow out of our hands because they do anyway. So might as well
I
just let them go and surrender. It's gonna be a lot easier,
That's
people.
right. Yep, it's true. It's so hard.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for your time,
It's
and I hope
fun.
that this was encouraging to people. Again, so so next month we will be on chapter 3. So hopefully you can join us then.